From legends on every dock to a name lost in bankruptcy court, OMC's story is boating's greatest rise and fall. And when they tried to stage a comeback, well, that part will surprise you most. Picture this. It's the 1960s, and if you walked down any dock in America, chances are you'd see the same names gleaming on outboards: Johnson and Evinrude. Together under OMC, the Outboard Marine Corporation, they weren't just brands, they were boating. If you had an OMC on your transom, you weren't tinkering in the margins of the hobby. You were riding with the market leader, the biggest player in the game. At its peak, OMC was the General Motors of the boating world. They had the scale, the factories, the research labs, and the dealer network that stretched from the Great Lakes to Florida's canals. For families buying their first runabout, an OMC-powered rig was as normal as having a Chevy in the driveway. And just like Detroit, they knew how to sell aspiration. Catalogs and boat shows painted Johnson and Evinrude as not just engines but lifestyles, and the products backed it up. In the 1960s and 70s, OMC churned out innovations like electric shift drives and stylish fiberglass runabouts through brands like Chris Craft, Four Winds, and Sea Swirl that they eventually scooped up. It felt like they were building an empire, one where the sound of a Johnson two-stroke popping to life was the soundtrack of every summer weekend. There was pride, too. Ask an old boater about their first outboard, and chances are they'll tell you about an OMC. Maybe it was finicky, maybe it smoked a little, but it always got them back to the dock. For decades, Johnson and Evinrude engines were as much a part of American recreation as hot dogs and baseball. Nobody thought the giant could fall. OMC was untouchable, or at least it seemed that way. But as boating history shows us, even the strongest wakes eventually flatten out. OMC ruled the waves, but here's the kicker: their fall was brutal. Stick around, because the comeback story is even crazier. Subscribe now. By the late 1970s, OMC was riding high. But like so many giants, it started tripping over its own wake. The company had grown so big that it began acting less like a nimble boat builder and more like a corporate bureaucracy. Instead of focusing on building the next generation of reliable, fuel-efficient engines, OMC piled into acquisitions, snapping up boat brands left and right, and spreading itself thin. Meanwhile, the competition was circling. Yamaha stormed into the US market with smooth, efficient outboards that made American two-strokes look outdated. Mercury kept pushing technology, investing heavily in performance and marketing. OMC, by comparison, was slower to adapt. They were still leaning on carburetors while rivals were tinkering with electronic fuel injection. It was like showing up to a Formula One race in a muscle car, loud, fun, but already behind the curve. And then came the 1990s. The EPA cracked down with strict emissions regulations, and suddenly those smoky two-strokes OMC had relied on were seen as dinosaurs. Johnson and Evinrude engines had loyal followings, but new buyers wanted cleaner, quieter, more efficient four-strokes. OMC tried to keep pace with innovations like Ficht direct injection, but the technology rolled out too fast, plagued by reliability issues. Some dealers joked that Ficht stood for Fix It Charlie's Tomorrow. Customers didn't laugh. They left. Financially, the empire was crumbling. By overextending into boat brands and under-delivering on outboard tech, OMC burned through cash. Bankruptcy loomed, and in December 2000, the unthinkable happened. OMC filed for Chapter 11. For boaters who'd grown up hearing Johnson and Evinrude firing across lakes, it felt like losing an old friend. The once untouchable giant had finally gone under. It was a spectacular fall from grace, and yet the story wasn't over, because soon there would be whispers of a comeback. When OMC went bankrupt in 2000, Most people assumed it was the end of Johnson and Evinrude. But in 2001, Canadian powerhouse Bombardier swooped in and picked up the Evinrude name, promising something bold, a true comeback. For die-hard OMC fans, it was like hearing your favorite band from the 70s was reuniting for a new tour. Could the magic return? Bombardier thought so, and they had a secret weapon, E-TEC. Launched in 2003, Evinrude's E-TEC direct injection two-strokes promised to be cleaner, stronger, and smarter than anything before. Marketing hammered home the message: no break-in period, no scheduled dealer maintenance for 3 years, and emissions cleaner than most four-strokes. It was billed as the Rocky Balboa of outboards, scrappy, underestimated but ready to shock the world. And to be fair, on paper, E-TEC was brilliant. The engines had impressive torque, they sipped less oil than old-school two-strokes, and they even earned EPA and CARB awards for ultra-low emissions. At boat shows, the pitch was irresistible. All the power of a two-stroke, none of the smoke. One demo famously showed an E-TEC running clean enough to sit in a showroom without choking the crowd. The comeback campaign tapped into nostalgia too. Loyal Johnson and Evinrude owners saw E-TEC as proof that their beloved brand still had fight left. For a while, it looked like Bombardier had cracked the code. E-TEC was fast, flashy, and carried the weight of OMC history behind it. But there was one problem. While OMC's dream of a comeback looked powerful in brochures, reality out on the water wasn't quite so simple. At first, E-TEC looked like a home run, but the shine didn't last. For all its clever marketing and award-winning emissions, the engines faced the same problem that had haunted OMC in its later years: timing. By the early 2000s, the market had shifted hard toward four-strokes. Yamaha, Honda, and Mercury were pushing quiet, fuel-efficient four-strokes that consumers adored. Buyers who'd grown tired of the smoke and growl of two-strokes were now bragging about how quiet their new four-strokes ran. Some joked you could sneak up on fish with them. Against that backdrop, even the most high-tech two-stroke looked a little old-fashioned. Then came the pricing problem. E-TECs weren't cheap. While Bombardier pitched them as maintenance savers, no dealer visits for 3 years. The upfront sticker price scared off a lot of buyers. Add in a dealer network that was nowhere near as extensive as Mercury's or Yamaha's, and suddenly owning an E-TEC felt more like joining a niche club than buying a mainstream engine. Loyalists were thrilled, but the average buyer wasn't biting. Worse, the reliability story was mixed. While many E-TECs ran beautifully, early models had quirks that created bad press. A few high-profile failures left some owners burned, and in boating, word of mouth spreads faster than a rooster tail. By 2007, Bombardier officially retired the Johnson brand, focusing everything on Evinrude. But even with that push, E-TEC never really took over the docks. Sales lagged behind Mercury and Yamaha, who were now dominating with bigger four-stroke lineups. In 2020, after nearly 2 decades of trying, BRP finally pulled the plug on Evinrude altogether. For OMC's loyal fans, it was a heartbreak. The comeback that was supposed to restore Johnson and Evinrude to glory had fizzled out like a firework that never left the tube. Even though the comeback fizzled, OMC's legacy hasn't faded. Ask any old-timer at a marina about their first boat, and chances are good it had a Johnson or an Evinrude strapped to the back. These engines weren't just tools, they were part of growing up. Families remember summer weekends where the smell of two-stroke oil mixed with sunscreen and grilled hot dogs. That's the kind of brand loyalty you can't manufacture with marketing. OMC also gave boating some of its biggest innovations: power tilt and trim. They were among the first to bring it mainstream. Outboard and boat packages. OMC practically invented the idea of buying a hull and motor together, making boating more accessible to average families. Their acquisitions, brands like Four Winds, Sea Swirl, Stratos, and Low, may have stretched them too thin financially, but it created an OMC family tree that still survives in different forms today. Then there's the collector's side. Vintage Johnsons and Evinrudes, especially the flashy 1950s models with chrome cowls and pastel paint, are prized like classic cars. Some boaters lovingly restore them, not because they're practical, but because they're rolling pieces of Americana. An old 35-horse Johnson in turquoise and white might not outrun a modern Yamaha, but it will definitely win a crowd at the dock. Even their quirks became part of the lore. OMC engines smoked, they barked, they occasionally flooded if you didn't know the right choke trick, but boaters remember those things fondly. For many, learning to coax an OMC to life was a rite of passage, so while the company itself sank, the culture it built still floats strong. OMC gave boating its golden age, and no amount of corporate missteps can erase that. E-TEC looked like OMC's lifeline, but here's the kicker. The dream didn't last. Stick around because the legacy that followed will blow you away, and please subscribe if you haven't. On paper, OMC's comeback looked like destiny. After all, this was the company that once ruled the docks, that gave America its first taste of fiberglass runabouts and iconic outboards. Nostalgia was on their side. Technology like E-TEC was in their arsenal, and Bombardier had the financial muscle to back it. For loyalists, it felt like seeing a beloved rock band announce a reunion tour. Everyone wanted to believe the glory days were about to return. But here's the reality. The world had already moved on, and OMC didn't move fast enough to catch it. By the time E-TEC arrived in the early 2000s, the outboard industry had changed. Yamaha was already winning offshore anglers with its big, quiet V6s. Mercury had reinvented itself with the Verado line, pushing four-stroke technology into every size category. Even Suzuki, often overlooked in casual dock talk, had carved out a reputation for bulletproof reliability. Against that backdrop, OMC's clean two-stroke pitch was clever, but it felt like trying to sell cassette tapes in the age of CDs. The market had flipped the page, and OMC was still playing catch-up. Dealer support didn't help either. Back in its prime, OMC's dealer network was an empire, coast-to-coast shops flying the Johnson and Evinrude flags. But bankruptcy fractured that chain. Mercury and Yamaha dealers, on the other hand, seemed to be everywhere. For a boater in the middle of a trip, convenience trumps nostalgia every time. Owning an Evinrude could feel like joining an exclusive club, right up until you needed service in the wrong marina. And then there was the cost. E-TEC's promised long service intervals, no dealer maintenance for 3 years, was a great marketing line, but the upfront sticker price was high. Buyers would look at the numbers, then at a Mercury or Yamaha with a larger dealer footprint, and quietly walk away. A loyal core of E-TEC fans swore by their engines, but the brand never gained the volume it needed to compete head-to-head. By 2007, Bombardier officially retired the Johnson brand, a symbolic moment that felt like losing half of OMC's soul. 13 years later, in 2020, BRP announced it would stop producing Evinrude outboards altogether. For many boaters, it was like losing an old friend twice. First in 2000 with OMC's bankruptcy, then again 2 decades later when the last trace of their engines disappeared from catalogs. So what really happened? OMC's dream of a comeback ran into the brutal realities of a changed industry. Their technology was ahead in some ways, E-TEC was efficient and innovative, but out of step in others. They had the heart of a pioneer, but not the legs to win the marathon. And yet, even in failure, OMC left a mark. They proved that bold ideas can shake things up. They showed that brand loyalty can last decades, and they reminded us that sometimes even a failed comeback is better than never trying. OMC may have sunk as a company, but its wake is still rippling across the boating world. OMC's dream of a comeback may not have lasted, but its story isn't just about engines, it's about an era. The Johnsons and Evinrudes weren't perfect, but they defined generations of summers, fishing trips, and weekends on the water. Even today, the sight of those classic cowls brings a smile, a memory, or maybe a little ache of what was lost. OMC didn't win its second act, but it gave us something better. Proof that legends never really die. Their wake is still out there, echoing across lakes and marinas, a reminder of boating's golden age. And if you want more untold stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay with us till the next ride.